All right, gather in close. The fire is crackling, sending embers spiraling up into the vast, inky blackness of the night sky. Out here, beyond the reach of city lights, the darkness feels alive. The woods are whispering their oldest secrets. Tonight, I've got one that's a real head-scratcher. A story with no ending, a puzzle with half the pieces missing. Not some dusty old folktale. A place that was on the map one day and wiped clean the next. A whole town, swallowed by the night. Lean in, listen closely. An expedition into the vanishing of Harmony Creek. This isn't your typical ghost town. Dusty saloons with swinging doors, tumbleweeds rolling down Main Street. This is different. This is stranger. Imagine a place vibrant and full of life, just gone. No signs of a struggle, no warnings, no bodies. Just an unnerving, deafening silence where a community once thrived. Official reports are thin, suspiciously so. To understand what was lost, you first have to understand what was there. Harmony Creek wasn't just a dot on a map, it was a living, breathing entity. Tucked away in a lush, bowl-shaped valley in the Cascade Mountains, it was a place straight out of a postcard. A single, pristine river, the town's namesake, snaked through its center, its waters so clear you could count the stones on the bottom. The air was always thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. The houses, no two alike, were masterpieces of timber and stone, built by the hands of the people who lived in them. They were famous for their woodwork, crafting everything from simple furniture to elaborate caskets with a skill that bordered on a spiritual art form. Life in Harmony Creek moved at its own pace. There was no rush. The community of roughly 300 souls was a tight-knit tapestry of families who had been there for generations. They were loggers, carvers, and farmers, living a life deeply connected to the forest that cradled them. They had their own general store, a one-room schoolhouse, and a small, simple chapel without a steeple. They generated their own power from the river and grew most of their own food. Outsiders were a rarity. The single, winding dirt road into the valley was known to be treacherous, and the locals weren't exactly known for their hospitality to strangers. They weren't hostile, just reserved. They had their world, and they saw no need for ours. The town was founded in the late 1800s by a reclusive group led by a man named Silas Kane. He was said to be a visionary, a philosopher who believed that modern society was a corrupting influence. He sought to create a utopia, a harmonious sanctuary shielded from the greed and noise of the outside world. For a town built on predictability, the months leading up to the disappearance were anything but. The strangeness started subtly, like a shift in the wind that only the most attuned would notice. It began with the animals. Seasoned hunters started reporting the woods had gone eerily quiet. Deer herds vanished from their usual grazing spots. The birds, normally a constant chorus, fell silent. One trapper who'd hiked to a nearby town for supplies told the store owner the entire forest felt like it was holding its breath. He said the silence was heavier and more unnerving than any storm he'd ever weathered. Then came the lights. People in the towns on the other side of the ridge began seeing odd, pulsing glows. They weren't planes, they weren't searchlights. Soft, ethereal orbs of blue light, soft, ethereal orbs of green light. They would hover silently for hours before winking out. No one from Harmony Creek ever mentioned them, at least not to outsiders. The delivery driver who made a monthly trip with mail and special order goods noted a change in the townspeople. Their usual reserved nature had curdled into something else. They seemed skittish, eyes constantly scanning the forested ridges. The night it happened was October 30th, 1953, the day before Halloween. The weather was calm, a crisp, clear autumn night with a sliver of a moon. A pilot flying a small cargo plane miles to the south reported seeing the valley of Harmony Creek lit up like a Christmas tree. He didn't mean festive lights. He described it as a brilliant, silent, blue-white flash. It illuminated the entire valley from within, casting the surrounding mountains in stark, momentary relief. It lasted only a second. Then the valley was plunged back into a darkness that seemed, to him, deeper than before. He reported it over the radio. There were no distress calls. There were no signs of a fire. It was logged as a possible lightning strike from a freak, localized storm cell. That night, the humming began. It was a sound that people in the surrounding areas would struggle to describe for years to come. It wasn't a mechanical noise, not like an engine, not like a generator. It was a low-frequency, pervasive hum. You felt it in your bones as much as you heard with your ears. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Some said it was like a million cicadas. Others compared it to a massive electrical transformer. A handful of people living in isolated cabins on the ridges said it was accompanied by a strange sweet smell. Smelled like ozone, smelled like honeysuckle. The humming lasted for about 3 hours, peaking around 2 a.m. and then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The next morning the mail driver, a man named Dave McCullough, made his scheduled monthly run. It was Halloween morning. He had a truck bed full of candy for the kids, and the usual parcels. As he navigated the final turn on the winding road, the point where the valley floor usually opened up before him, the initial response was a mess of confusion and disbelief. When Dave McCullough finally reached the nearest sheriff's office, his story was so outlandish he was initially suspected of being drunk or crazy. But he was a known, reliable man. A deputy was dispatched, and then another. By nightfall, a small contingent of state police was at the edge of the valley, their flashlight beams cutting into the unnerving emptiness, confirming the impossible. A town of 300 people, their homes, their possessions, their entire existence had vanished overnight. The news, when it finally broke, was a national sensation for about a week, a bizarre Halloween headline that captured the public's imagination. The investigation that followed was one of the most frustrating and fruitless in state history. Search parties equipped with dogs and a small army of volunteers combed every inch of the valley and the surrounding forest. They found nothing, not a single footprint, not a single hairpin. Faced with an inexplicable event and a journal that sounded like the work of a madman, the government did what it often does with things it can't explain. It buried it. The official investigation was quietly closed. The final report, which is still heavily redacted to this day, concluded that the residents of Harmony Creek had simply performed a mass, organized migration. They claimed the townspeople, under the sway of their leader, had methodically dismantled their entire town, loaded it onto wagons, loaded it onto trucks, and disappeared into the vast, unpopulated regions of the American West or Canada, seeking even greater isolation. This explanation, of course, is absurd on its face. The logistics of 300 people dismantling dozens of buildings, including their stone foundations. When the official story doesn't add up, you have to turn to the unofficial one. You have to listen to the people who have lived on that land for centuries. The local Native American tribes, whose ancestors watched Silas Kane lead his followers into the valley, have their own explanation. To them, the valley was never meant for human settlement. It was a sacred place, a taboo place. They call it the Valley of the Deep Hum, and their stories warn that it is a thin place where the veil between our world and the world of the spirits is weak. They believe the ground itself is alive and that it does not suffer trespassers for long. Their legends speak of a pact, mirroring Silas Kane's journal in a chilling way, but in their version the pact is a trap. Once you think outside the usual ideas of curses and old stories, you find yourself in a whole new world of super weird stuff. The 1950s were a big time for seeing UFOs, and what happened at Harmony Creek fits right in. There were strange floating lights seen in the weeks before, then a huge quiet flash of energy, a humming sound, and of course a lot of people just vanished without a trace. For people who study UFOs, this isn't a puzzle, it's a classic case of a big group of people being taken away. They think that Harmony Creek wasn't just far away from everyone else, but maybe it was like a special place or a study group for visitors from other planets. This idea says that the people of Harmony Creek might have been talking to these beings for many years. So where does that leave us? We stand at the edge of this empty valley, the wind whispering through the grass, and we're left with more questions than answers. We have a collection of puzzle pieces that don't fit together. Each theory is wild, and yet each feels more plausible than random disappearance. But the story lives on, around campfires just like this one. It's a reminder that there are still blank spots on the map, places where the world we think we know brushes up against something ancient, unknown, and powerful. The story of Harmony Creek is America's most unsettling campfire tale because it just might be true. Now I want to know what you think. What's your theory? Drop it in the comments below. And if you want to join me on more expeditions into the unknown, make sure to follow and subscribe.